I am Sheila Bravo and want to welcome you to our conversation about Census 2020. There is a chat box, so if you have questions that you would like to bring or having any technical difficulty, you can direct them to Jenny Brand. You'll see her name there, and she will answer them. I do welcome questions during the kind of the overview portion, and certainly I've left some time so that we can have good, robust conversation at the end. So I want to thank you again for being part of the conversation about Census 2020. It's hard to believe that April 1st, which is the census count day, is going to be fast approaching. And so I'm hoping today I can give you a quick overview of what's been going on, some details about census, and then, as I mentioned, leave time for questions. So for today, I want to just do an overview nationally of what is involved with census, and also give you some specifics about the Delaware scene, talk about the targeted populations that we are most concerned with around census, and then how you can help. I also want to just give a quick shout out. We have Chris Fullman from the US Census. He's our Delaware partner, and he also is here to answer any technical questions. And just to let you know, Jenny is hoping to record this Zoom webinar. If for some reason you are uncomfortable with that, please send her a message, and we will manage that appropriately. So first, just a quick overview of census itself. Census is something that is mandated in our Constitution. It's a way for our government to kind of know who all is here. And it counts individuals who are living or residing in the United States on a specific day. For those of us in the nonprofit sector, the reason why we care about this is that census does inform federal funding allocations. And so for the services that we provide that are sourced by the federal government, the population count is a really big driver of the level of funding that we receive. Census is not only about funding allocations, it also does set up the districts and the ways in which people are represented in the community. It is also helps to inform a lot of business decisions. I don't know about you, but I use population counts a lot to understand trends and per capita, needs and things like that. So population counts and accuracy is really important. In Delaware, to give you perspective, in 2010, the estimated undercount of the population equated to about $10 million a year of less federal funding here in the state. So you can imagine over a decade, which census happens every 10 years, we're talking about over $100 million. And a lot of this funding is the funding that would be supporting the populations that we serve, communities of color, children, and immigrant populations. Who should be counted? Everybody. There's a listing here on the slide. The thing that I thought was really interesting is that even if there is a baby about to be born, that baby should be counted. So the government is wanting to know who is residing in the United States on that April 1st date. And it doesn't mean where you could be temporarily residing with someone else, you would still be counted at that location. The only individuals in the country who would not participate in census are those who are visiting the country for vacation or business. Otherwise, no matter what your status is, if you are here for a period of time beyond just visiting, you want to be counted in the census, or we want you to be counted in the census. For those of us who support individuals that are incarceration, assisted living, or in schools, the census does make special accommodations for the counting process. Often the federal government will work with the institutions to count the individuals in their place. So college students, for example, will be counted at their college. Individuals in prison would be counted in the places where they're incarcerated. So there's a special process that's set up for that. And here in Delaware, there is a committee that is specifically working on the strategies to ensure that the counts happen and that they're appropriately and accurate. One of the things we wanted to bring up is that since the 2010 census, there's been a lot of things that have happened, and 2020 is going to be a little bit different. First is the formula, the federal allocation for funding census did not dramatically grow in 2020 versus 2010. So they estimate there might be 13 to 14 million more people to count, but there's not necessarily more money for that. I just saw some information that came over earlier this week that there may be a special appropriation that would increase the allocation for census. Our senators were co-signed on a bill to try to encourage a complete count. So there may be a little extra funding that comes in, but net, being resourceful is going to be very important for the census so that they can count everybody within the budget they have. The other thing that's happened is just with a social media society, we have greater diversity. We also have, unfortunately, more distrust for government. People's interest in participating and how they access information to inform their participation has definitely changed since 2010. In 2010 and definitely here in 2020, there were populations that had underrepresented counts. They were considered hard to count populations. And as you can see from this list, it's a pretty diverse list of population segments. Now, this is at the federal level. Here in Delaware, it was often communities in poverty, as well as households of children that we saw a lower count. And count is considered a percentage of the way they figure out that they've missed them is they do subsequent surveys through the American Community Surveys Act every year. And that's how they're beginning to find out that, gee, we might have missed this portion of the community. But you can see here that these are populations that either may be isolated, are dependent on others to help them navigate society, or may not speak English or read or write. And so we want to, part of our strategy this year is to identify how we can help individuals who may be in these situations to, to understand why they want to participate in census, and then more importantly, how they can participate. In the attachments that Jenny sent over to you earlier, there were a couple of resources, and one of them is called the Response Outreach Area Mapper, or ROAM. And I just took a snapshot of a couple of these things, but you can see the darker blue represents areas that the census predicts will have a lower response rate, to the tune of, the dark blue is like 30 to 48% potential for non-response. So these become geographic areas that we would want to focus our efforts to try to encourage people to understand why participation matters, and to help assist them in that. So this is the Wilmington area. This is a snapshot of Newcastle County. The Newark area, interestingly, had almost, I think it was like a 52% response rate. It was really low. What we found out is that spring break happens on April 1st. And so we have a lot of students and staff that may not be in the area. So as part of our strategy for 2020, we're reaching out to the universities, and I say we, I'll talk to you a little bit about how Delaware's tackling this, but recognizing that that is an opportunity for us to encourage participation on for census with the university. Kent County, you can see around the Dover area, had a lower count, or anticipated lower count. And then in Sussex County, you've got the Georgetown area specifically, but then that western Sussex County as well. Again, this is projected. Our job is to not make that happen. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the strategies that we are suggesting we apply here in the state. So 2020, the other thing the federal government is doing is adding a way in which people can complete census online. And in fact, when we think again about there not having the increased funding levels, if they are able to secure responses through online, phone, and paper, that is less people that they need to deploy out into the communities to knock on doors. So one of the things we have shared with some of the nonprofits that are working with populations that might be very concerned about government knowing where they live is to encourage them to participate either through the phone, online, or in a mail-in, and that would reduce the chance of somebody actually knocking on the door to ask information. The kind of questions that are going to be asked, I'm going to, hopefully this will work. Let's see if I can do this real quickly. Oh, there we go. It's a short form questionnaire, and again, it's designed to just ask some basic questions on the number of people living there, the kind of residence. There is a question about phone number, but that's mainly so that if the questionnaire was not completed correctly, or it looked a little odd, they would have somebody they could reach out and ask to verify it. They do ask about individuals' gender. They removed an option for somebody to not specify their gender. So we recognize that that can be a concern for those who may not identify as male or female. And then on the, you can see for racial identity and ethnic identity, they have some questions here, as well as an option to be able to type in an individual's race. Yesterday, we were having conversations with the Haitian community, and there was concern expressed that Haitians do not consider themselves African American, and maybe not even Black. And so part of what we talked about is how do we help the Haitian community, as an example, use common identifiers, so that when it comes to looking at how many Haitians are really living in this case it was Sussex County, that there's a more accurate account, because they did acknowledge that we're undercounted, and there's a perception that there's less of them than there really are. And they recognize that from an advocacy standpoint and from access to resources, that can be an issue. So we're already having some of those questions with individuals. You'll see then for each person in the household thereafter, similar questions are asked. And this questionnaire is in both, excuse me, English as well as in Spanish. Go back to the slide. One thing we want to really stress is that the census workers, census itself is not going to ask for information such as Social Security. They're not going to ask for money, political affiliation. We are sensitive to the fact that there are parties out there that might try to capitalize on census, and we've seen some examples of that. If you hear of anything where there's misrepresentation of census, or there are individuals or groups trying to present themselves as census or census workers, we'd like to know about that so that we can raise visibility about that concern. But especially when we think about populations that may be fearful of participating in census, we don't want to create extra confusion around who really is or is not a census worker. For the purposes of the census employees who will be actually out counting, they will have very specific identification so that they are noticed. We are talking about what we may need to do for those of us who are volunteering to help make it clear that we are working on behalf of census. But just wanted to highlight that we are aware that just like we hear of election disinformation, we may see also census disinformation. Because we do have such great diversity in our country now with languages, there are going to be a variety of different ways in which individuals who do not speak or read English can participate in census. The mailed questionnaires and the mailings to residences is going to be both in English and in Spanish, or I should say that in areas where they believe there's a large Spanish speaking population, they will then send the material in Spanish as well. If someone does not speak Spanish or English, they can use the internet, and the online website will have 12 languages, which represent about 99% of individuals who don't speak English. Beyond that, there is a phone option where there are 59 different languages that are represented. And that includes American, I don't know how they're going to do sign language over the phone, but it might be video. I included in the sheet that we sent out with the login information, there is a link that takes you to a 60 languages PDFs that are about how to fill out the census. So if you are working with a population that, let's say, speaks Korean, that material is available that helps educate folks on how to participate in census. So that is one way in which the federal government is trying to accommodate the diversity of our languages here in the country. I do want to stress, though, that because the paper mailings are going out in English and Spanish, we hit a barrier that if somebody receives that in the mail and they don't read English or Spanish, they're not going to know what to do with it. So prior to the first mailing, one of the things we want to be able to do is bring awareness of census and what people can expect to receive in the mail so they know to look forward to it. Speaking of timing, the first mailing that will be sent out by the census is in early March. You can see the dates here. That means between now and that early March period, our outreach efforts really matter so that we can help prepare people for census is coming. As you can see, there's a variety of outreaches that census will be doing. Again, if they can see the response rates happening online or through the phone, then they're not going to need to send out those mailings as much. After you get past April, that's when the census enumerators would begin reaching out and actually knocking on those doors that may not have participated yet. I should say that the census, the way in which they find people is through addresses. So they've been working with the Office of State Planning here in Delaware, that office has been updating its records and addresses. For individuals who don't have an address that the census knows about, they can still participate in census. When they go online, there's a code that's generated, and then they would type in the address in which they are residing. We do recognize that for individuals who do not have an address, and may not be using shelters, that we will have to do some specific outreach and connection, and perhaps even arrange to have a census enumerator go visit. We were talking about in Kent County, for example, there are some communities, homeless communities, that have chosen not to use the shelters, but obviously don't have a physical mailing address. So some of the challenges to overcome with our hard to count populations is, one, just an awareness about census and the mailings, as I mentioned before. The same as I mentioned is that they may not recognize it or speak the language, and even if they do speak English or Spanish, they may not be able to read. So we recognize that that is a challenge. The fear in participating or the inability to participate. We often think about individuals who don't speak the language or read or write, but there's also other population types that we recognize may have difficulty accessing. For example, the older adults who may not be able to travel anymore, shut-ins, those who are isolated at home, they may not be comfortable opening the door to an enumerator, and they may also not be comfortable using the internet. So we've already started some conversations with the folks, for example, Meals on Wheels, on how they might help to provide us, identify those individuals. Also, individuals with disabilities, we want to be able to ensure that we've accommodated them. And then finally, children under the age of 5. That population, the research has found that one of the biggest reasons why that population was not counted in the 2010 census is because their caregivers did not know they were supposed to count them. So we do want to make sure that it's clear that including the children is important, particularly because that's one population that receives some of the largest amount of federal funding. And one of the ways in which the census is encouraging us to develop strategies is to form complete count committees. They can be formed at the local community level. They can be formed as coalitions that focus on specific populations, or at the state level. In Delaware, the governor formed a complete count commission in 2018. Lieutenant Bethany Hall Long is chairing that. And there's several committees that were set up to look at the strategies around how we can encourage a complete count. Myself and Lolita Lopez are co-chairing the Hard to Count Population Committee. And we, along with the committee that was focused on special populations, were charged with identifying the strategy specifically for those population types. And once that was completed, move that to the geographic committees so that we could, they could then begin to implement those strategies within their geographies. And then finally, we have some supporting committees, the philanthropic and business community, led by Cynthia Pritchard from Philanthropy Delaware, and Tom Doherty. They have been very resourceful in identifying match funds to support the census efforts. We were successful at the last legislative session for $650,000 to be allocated to the complete count process. And the commission is now in the process of identifying how those funds will be deployed. Again, will most likely be deployed to the geographic level and in a couple of ways, which I'll share with you. Because the hard to count populations is really where the federal census, and we believe, is been our area of undercount. When we think about our outreach strategies, that's really where we are focused. The federal government is definitely going to be doing a lot of promotion around census participation. And the state of Delaware has allocated funding also to do specific communication around census. What we need to do as an overlay is to specifically reach these populations that may not necessarily use regular channels or have their own communication networks that they reference. And the 3 things that we need to do is to create awareness as to why it's important to participate. And the good news is that for many of these population segments, particularly for ethnic and cultural segments, there has already been messaging developed that's targeted specifically for them. So we are able to tap videos and posters and other types of material that we can then just quickly customize for Delaware. Once people are aware about census, then it's how do we educate them on how to participate and encourage them to participate. And that's really overcoming these area issues around mistrust, barriers of trust, or possibly even access to participate in census. And that's really the 3rd strategy, which is providing a means for safe, what I'll call safe participation. I put it in quotes because certainly participating in census is safe, but how do we help them feel safe? And this really gets to having trusted individuals serving as that advocate for census, educating people appropriately, and then identifying ways in which they can participate. For example, the libraries have computers that are available for individuals who don't have access to a computer but can get to a library. That could be a way in which they can participate. We may find that for certain populations, asking their employers to accommodate and allow them to use their computers at work to participate in census. So depending on the population that we're looking at, the strategy may be different. The hard to count population subcommittee, what we developed was what I'll call overarching strategies, but we really believe that the real work needs to happen within local communities, within nonprofits and faith organizations and government agencies that actually are already trusted sources that these populations would be willing to listen to and then participate with census. Our thought is beyond the organizations is to identify individuals who have very have close connections and can help to be out in that community. Similar to, if you've heard of the Health Ambassador program, these are census ambassadors. And then finally, these census ambassadors can identify locations where individuals would be able to access either a computer if they wanted to do online, perhaps an interpreter if that's what's needed, or we can coordinate and possibly have a census enumerator who could, for example, come to a community center and assist people in their census participation. The last couple of sessions that I've had the opportunity to hold with individuals who are part of some of these hard to count populations, questions that I've received are here. This question about why should hard to count populations participate? And one of the things that has been very compelling in the message testing is really bringing it home and making it personal for them, particularly for those who have children. Here in Delaware, we have a Purchase for Care program that is designed to allow parents to be able to go to work while their children go to preschool. That funding is driven from an understanding of how many children are there. So making it a little personal so that they see the value of the services that they use are directly derived from those population counts. Overcoming the fear of being found or found out. We heard that, for example, there are certain population groups where the people whose names are on the residence are legally resident here, but they may have family members that have come to the country and may not be legally resident, or an apartment that is coded for 4 people, but there's actually 8 people living there. So those are the kinds of questions that is going to raise concerns, because when they fill out that census form, they're being asked to identify how many people and their names and their age. The one thing that we can say to that is that it is 100% confidential. The federal census workers will actually go to prison if they reported any of the information on those census forms. The data from the census forms are aggregated up into the statistics. So the Census Bureau is not permitted to share any individual census form or any individual data with anyone other than the census themselves and the process that they use to capture the data. Another question is around how much help can we give when completing the census? It's very important that as we think about how we assist people, we cannot answer the census questions for them. We can ask them the question, what is your name? How old are you? What is your date of birth? But we can't say, oh, your name is Sheila Bravo. That crosses the line. If someone needs help in defining or creating their answers, that's where we need to make sure there's a federal census worker that's part of that process. And how will individuals who don't read or write complete census? Again, they could do it over the phone, or there can be somebody who can ask the question and that person can respond to it. If you are aware of a population that perhaps is maybe very small, but does not speak or read or write the language that are on those, on the 60 languages, please let us know and we can work with you on identifying a strategy to assist them to participate. Timeline. It's coming up very fast. Currently, we have been, Dana has been reaching out to certain groups, and then today is an example of starting to really broadcast a little bit more broader, the strategies that we're trying to use. We are, some of the nonprofits that are participating in this are working with us on identifying census ambassadors in and around the state, and it would be across the state: Wilmington, Newcastle County, Sussex, and Kent County for those ambassadors. January is really important because this is really where we need to increase and start to create public awareness about census, to understand where certain populations may be in their acceptance to participate in census and where they may have barriers, so that we can identify methods to communicate. One thing that's listed here also is that we believe social media is going to be a very important communication tool, particularly for populations that may not have access to computers, but they have phones. And so mobile communication will be, and mobile, by the way, I believe you can fill out the form through your phone as well. February, March really is then finalizing the strategies, confirming what locations will be sites for individuals to go to complete census, and I'll use the libraries again. And then as we move into April, our goal is to try to get 80% participation before the enumerators go door to door. So a lot of work ahead of us, but it can be made so much easier by your help and support in helping to educate and identify groups or potential barriers to access, so that we can work with you to develop those strategies. Ways in which nonprofits can help out is one, the federal government is hiring. They need to hire nearly 3,000 people is what they're assuming for Delaware. And so you can help by encouraging people who are looking to earn some extra income. This is a great way. Included in the email that Jenny sent you is a bulletin around advocacy needed for waivers. Here in Delaware, we currently have a waiver for SNAP benefits. And what this means is because the federal census job is paying pretty well, we don't want an individual who for a couple of months earned a great salary lose their benefits. So in order for that not to happen, each state has to actually create a waiver for those particular programs. And so if you are familiar with a benefit here in Delaware that your population could possibly lose if they participate as a federal census worker, please advocate to the appropriate department and division to make sure that they get on the waiver. We have only until December 31st, and I apologize, I just found out about it myself on Friday. So I wanted to include that information to those of you who would like to speak up and ensure those waivers take place. The second area is around advising the census, U.S. Census specialists. So these are the federal census specialists that will work with Chris Fullman and the census ambassadors. And to give you an example, in Sussex County, First State Community Action Agency might have census ambassadors that they contract, but then we have La Speranza and Westside Health and a couple of other nonprofits along with the county that would serve almost as a small advisory committee to guide anything that they have, and allow the ambassadors also to be able to report in on what they're doing. Identify key influencers. Who are individuals, faith leaders, elected officials, business people that you believe would be really important for them to be educated, because they can play an important role in encouraging people to participate. Educating your employees and volunteers about the importance of census participation, and perhaps accommodating them to allow them to, if they don't have access to a computer, to perhaps use a computer at your site that they could be able to complete a census. And another way could be if you believe that your location is one that would make people feel comfortable participating in census, to consider being an access site for census questionnaire completion. I just wanted to shout out that we believe social media will be really important. And here in Delaware, there will be Delaware specific census hashtags and links, and that is currently being finalized by the subcommittee on communication that the state created. A lot of resources are available. I tried to give you a sampling of a couple of them. The U.S. Census Bureau has a ton of material, a lot of how-to guides, as well as an organization called Census Count, which is a coalition of a lot of the national advocate organizations that focus on empowering and championing special hard to count populations. I included for you also the Delaware website that is still being built out. And then Share Delaware, we have a census page that connects to Philanthropy Delaware's list of resources. One thing that we are asking is, because this is an effort that we believe as we move into the next decade, 2030, is going to be repeated, is we want to make sure we capture what efforts were done to encourage a complete count. And so if your organization holds informational meetings or you become a site location for census completion, please keep track of that information and report that back. We've created an email address where you can send that information to us. It's also an email that you can use if you would like somebody to come speak to your organization, to your board, to your volunteers. We're happy to put folks out there to help educate and make a complete count possible. So I am going to stop there. As I mentioned, I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for questions. And I'm going to open the floor right now. I see I've got one chat up right here. Yes, Jenny, I did. Thank you. Wanted to mention that we did record this. And if for some reason you were not comfortable with that, please send Jenny Brand a note about that so that we can manage that appropriately. If you have a question, feel free to unmute, and I'll do my best to answer it.
Hi. Hi.
Hi there.
Hi. The League of Women Voters is very anxious to participate. And for example, we could send people out to speak at different organizations, but I got the impression from your presentation that only ambassadors are supposed to go out and speak in public.
Oh, no, I'm not an ambassador and I'm doing lots of speaking. So okay. We'd be happy to coordinate with you. You know, this is one of these things where the more voices that are out there speaking up about this, the better, but we do want to make sure we're all speaking the same.
Okay, good.
So happy to set up some time where we could sit down and provide you. You'd be happy, welcome to use this presentation.
Okay, good.
That makes it easier, and also could share with you some of the material that we've been using to hand out to folks when we speak.
Okay, great. Now, another one is that we're very anxious to make sure that prisoners are counted for redistricting purposes at their home address, and the census won't do that. Well, I mean, they're counting them at the prison. So do you know how they're going to get the data about their last home address?
I'm not sure about that. Chris Fullman, if you are still on, would you be able to address that?
I'm going to go to the Complete Count Commission meeting, so I'll ask it there.
Okay, yeah, because the chairs of the special population, since they're working with the prisons, but I'll also make sure that we document that and see if we can get an answer for you. Okay, oh, Gary, there you are.
Yeah, so I was going to say that's something that is determined on the state level. So as you said, after the Complete Count Committee meeting today, there should be some answers if in fact there's been any progress with that. As of right now, they are still being counted in their prisons, and the goal for Delaware is to have prisoners counted where they're from, because of the fact that we have prisoners who are from Delaware but aren't incarcerated in Delaware. So there's a couple of different issues as far as areas are concerned, but that is a state decision. So hopefully, like as said, after this meeting, there'll be some more information.
Okay, thank you. I think I might have more, but I'll wait. Let others have a chance.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Wow, I can't imagine I answered everybody's questions with that presentation. There's no way.
Well, okay, I'll give you some more.
Okay.
You said that you're not allowed to help people with the answers, but what about people who are who have dementia? How do you deal with them? For example, I live at the Moorings, which is a continuing care community, and we have a dementia section, and there are a number of people in there. And how do they get counted?
They are considered a special population, just like those who are incarcerated or people who might be hospitalized. The census will be working with the institution, and the institution would most likely then provide the statistics that they're looking for. And
Okay.
again, Gary, I'll defer to you as the technical expert if I have that incorrect.
Okay.
No, that's actually 100% correct. Especially for long-term care centers, they are counted in group quarters, which is the effort that's going out now. So whether it be facility managers or whoever the point of contact is at those locations, they will be working directly with the census team to make sure that everyone within those facilities is accounted for properly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Sheila,
Yeah.
this is Marge Johnson, also from the League of Women Voters, but this seems like such an overwhelming task to me, and I'm sure it does to you as well. With all the stuff that you talked about, I'm just wondering how can groups like ours, I mean, Sandy mentioned we could go out and educate people, but getting those groups on board, I'm thinking particularly like the faith communities that could be really effective. What's the strategies for getting the word out, I guess is what I'm asking.
Thank you. It's really going to depend on a couple of things. For example, your volunteer efforts, wanting to help out, it adds like extra awareness muscle. And so as we look at who we need to speak with, if you're able to do that and let's say census ambassadors can't, that can really add value. There are a couple of community groups that if we were able to get onto their program schedules, think about Rotary clubs, Kiwanis, some of the social support groups and communities. The other would be at churches. If a local pastor or minister was willing to allow someone perhaps during coffee hour or to have a little booth, a table to speak about census, that's another way to do it. We have reached out. We had yesterday several clergy that work with the Haitian community and the seasonal worker community in Sussex County. And so they were there. So the other opportunities, there are interfaith groups that clergy gather together again to see if we can get on their program. So I think it's a combination of, as you become aware of an opportunity for someone to speak or present for census, whether you want to take it on or whether we have somebody, a census ambassador to do that, I think that's how it's going to work for us. Ideally, we would have had this infrastructure, so to speak, in place in the middle of 2019, so we'd have a little bit more of a runway, but we don't. So we have to work as best we can. I also strongly encourage us to speak to our elected officials at the municipal level, as well as the county and our state elected officials, because they're also in many, many conversations, and they can be a voice as well. So we are not discriminatory when it comes to who wants to talk about census and why it's important. We want to just make sure we've given you the right information And if you need handouts or flyers or posters, whatever you need, you let us know, and we'll be able to assist you with that. And I say we, I'm really talking about the Complete Count Commission. Dana, we're committed to supporting our nonprofits to help them. But if you need something produced in a specific language, we can connect you to the group that's coordinating that.
So we would go through you.
Yeah,
get
if you'd
that,
like
yeah.
to.
Okay.
That's Census 2020 at Delaware Nonprofit. We created that email address.
Okay.
So it's easy for you to send in your questions and your requests, and then we'll try to point you to the right person.
So just one more question. Do you know what the status is of the elected officials in the city of Wilmington? What their stance is? What are they working on?
So Wilmington has been represented at the Complete Count Commission. They did have some transition, and that's why I had the XXX, because I was not at the last meeting to know who the new representative, but they have been very actively involved.
Okay.
We also had representatives from the Wilmington area on our hard to count population committee. Wilmington has been allocated a specific set of funds to support the outreach efforts. And so they would be applying that strategy of census ambassadors within the Wilmington area. But though Wilmington may not be a large city, there's still a lot of work that will need to be done. And so I'm sure that if you had folks who wanted to help specifically in Wilmington, we could help connect you to them.
Okay, good. Thank you.
There is a meeting of the Complete Count Commission this afternoon at 1 o'clock at Legislative Hall, and I plan to be going to that. So I'll try to share that information with everybody in the league.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest let people know about that. They're really good meetings, and this particular meeting will be where the commission is actually finalizing their report for the governor's office, which was a key requirement that the governor had made when they formed the commission. So it'll be a good meeting to attend.
Is there a meeting, is there an opportunity for attendees to ask questions at that meeting? Do you know?
Usually Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long does permit questions, through the order of the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions?
Sheila, did you see that there was a question from Paulette in the comment section?
Oh, thank you, Mel. Hi, Paulette. So thank you, Paulette. So an example, Paulette is offering to assist with some of the transition homes in Georgetown, but also mentioned that prisons can count in real time by using their DELJIS, using their SBI numbers. I am not familiar with what that means, but it does look like the prisons have, they've been collecting the data that the census would use. Again, we have a committee that is formed specifically to work on the strategies related to those special populations, such as those incarcerated. And I'm pretty sure they're going to be reporting out at this meeting this afternoon on what their strategies are.
That's great. DELJIS is the organization. It's a Delaware Justice Information System.
Oh,
and
thank
so
you.
they're the ones that keep all kinds of data about the prison system and prisoners and so on. So hopefully they're the ones that have the home address for the prisoners that will be eventually used. I read in the paper that the census it was an Associated Press article that indicated that the census will provide states with a separate data set with prisoners' home addresses. But I wasn't quite sure how the census would get the home address if they're only counting them at the prison. So I'm hoping to find out about that today, later at the meeting.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Another thing that we're doing, just to give everyone a heads up, is we really believe working through the early childhood division and reaching the preschools. so that they can help educate parents is an important strategy. Certainly the regular school system, K through 12, will be pushing out information, but it's the preschools where we have the children under the age of 5. And so that's another strategy that we've started conversations with the Division of Early Learning. If there are other population groups or agencies or networks that you all believe would be really helpful for us to be able to, again, present or share information, please let us know. This is one time where everyone can agree that this matters, and it's really a great opportunity for all of us to work collaboratively together. And wouldn't it be amazing if Delaware could promote that it was the first state to get 100% participation in census?
Sheila, this is Marge Johnson again. I just want to say this task, as I said before, seems daunting. So I just want to thank you and Dana for coordinating all of this for all of these many groups in the state of Delaware and working for such a high goal. So thank you for your efforts. And if you are putting out, if you identify things, you're asking us to identify, but I'm also saying if you identify things that you need help with, to put the word out so we can respond.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. I do really want to also give a shout out to Philanthropy Delaware, who has been quietly working behind the scenes to secure in-kind support and financial support for the efforts from the business community and really from the government agencies. So it's really so far been pretty amazing, all the effort that's put into it, but it's been kind of behind the scenes, and now our work is to push it out and really start to mobilize.
Right. And that behind the scenes work is really important, and we're grateful to those people, but the public also needs to know that that's going on. This is a huge task. It's not just every 10 years you fill out a form. So.
Right. Well, any other questions? Everyone have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.